Hi again, global friends. Welcome back to Round the World. Today, we have two incredible friends of friends, one of which is down in Baja, Mexico, and the other is all the way over in Zimbabwe, Africa. So let's get right to it. Let's see what they're going through. Hi again, global friends, and welcome back to Round the World. I have a friend named Jackie McGuido, who is one of the greatest hair and makeup gurus here in Hollywood. She is originally from Zimbabwe and owns a global makeup brand that is also based there. She has a friend who she told me I needed to call. So let's check in with Rhuveneko and see how things are going in Africa.
Hey, I'm Rhuveneko, and I am a broadcast journalist. I'm based in Zimbabwe, Harare, in the capital. And right now, I'm actually full-time at the ZBC, which is the public broadcaster, and I'm the director of corporate communications. And I'm just passionate about my continent. I'm part of a number of organizations and trusts where we deal with Pan-Africanism in a lot of ways, especially amongst young people. For example, I sit on the Gracia Michel Trust. And so we meet as women in media and we tell the stories and narratives of women and girls in particular in Africa. I also have a charity called the Zimbola Foundation. When it first started, we were helping people who couldn't afford blood to get blood. But now it was lifted now that blood is now free for public hospitals in Zimbabwe. So now I have to find a new drive for my foundation and redirect my energy somewhere else. But that's me in a nutshell.
Can you tell me what the level of quarantine is currently in Zimbabwe?
Well, I'll talk about when it first started. So last week, Monday, it was so well responded to. You found that people were very, very obedient to this announcement from our president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, and people stayed at home. And then add to that about sort of 4 or 5 days later, there was a little bit more free, fluid movement on the streets. Maybe also because our statistics are not that high. Which is, I'm sure, subject we'll get into in a moment. But it's really to say the lockdown has been successful overall. The only bus company that is operating is called Zupco. That's under government, and it caters to all the civil servants. So all your critical and essential staff that still need to go to work, your healthcare workers, all of them. So that's still operational. The smaller public transport providers, which we call combis here, which are like little mini buses, they've been completely suspended, which has definitely cut off livelihood of many people. There's so many dynamics for Africa where this lockdown just doesn't work in some instances. But generally, the lockdown has been observed. I'll say that, honestly, with like probably 95% cooperation.
What were your thoughts when COVID-19 first got into media? I mean, Zimbabwe is quite a far stretch from China. So what were your first thoughts?
Yeah, you're right, because China is so far away. Many of us thought, perhaps another bird flu that might end there, and we definitely didn't think it would come home. I'll give you that much. But we do have a lot of Chinese nationals working in Zimbabwe on many projects, developmental projects, industry, agriculture. So there are a number of them here. So we're also aware that the movement between Chinese nationals into Zimbabwe is quite high. And you think of the aircrafts that sort of bring them here. There's no direct flight, granted, but even if you're going via Dubai on Emirates, there's still that movement. So initially, we didn't think it was going to come here. I'll be very honest with you. And we sort of watched it go across to the west before it came down. And it was just like, what is this? I mean, just watch the news, and we just couldn't believe how quickly it was spreading in Europe. And I think that's when people first got a shock that, if it ever comes to Africa, this won't be good. And then our neighbor, of course, was one of the first hit and hard hit. Then we realized, no, this is actually very, very and too close to home. So by the time it hit us, we had a lot of information about the virus. Granted, it's novel, so still not enough information, but we knew that if it hits us, it's not going to go well, because the scariest thing about being an African country and a developing country at that is if you're watching first world countries struggle to contain a pandemic, your first question is, how are we going to manage if it hits us? Unfortunately, that fake news narrative, again, the novelty of the virus, that whole it doesn't affect Black people, hit quite hard. And people thought, oh no, maybe it won't, maybe if it comes, it won't hold. Oh, it doesn't affect hot climates. We're still in summer, so we thought it won't hold. Then South Africa just kept recording these statistics, and we're like, well, same number of Black people, same climate. And so the reality, honestly, it literally closed in on us slowly, like a cloud you see approaching from far away, and you think the rain's going to stop there, but it can't. So that's really the sentiment. It was quite shocking, and then also just a reality check that look, don't think that pandemics discriminate. It's like at some point people thought HIV was a Black people's disease. You know what I mean? It doesn't discriminate across borders, across race, across everything. It is just not kind. All right. I mean, the highest offices in the world have been affected by this. So we finally had to embrace that it's here, but we don't know how hard it's hit us yet.
Because most Americans probably don't know. What is your typical medical situation like for healthcare and things of that nature?
The private healthcare is very decent, very expensive, but very decent in terms of, being able to get the basic treatments, and even the most complex surgeries, right, can still be done here. The public sector, a little bit more compromised. Okay, they're not well equipped. The hospitals are really running on like empty. They even when we talk of ventilators, there was a time when COVID first hit, there were only 2 ventilators in the entire country. That number went up to 4, and now there've been a number of donations. So now we've got a couple, all right. But now you struggle because initially some of the healthcare workers didn't have enough protective gear to go to work. So at some point, even nurses had downed their tools, saying, look, we don't understand this virus. It's just not worth it. We're critical staff, but also do your part as government. So I know they have stepped in now. So at least our healthcare workers are getting the protective gear that they require. Is every health facility catered to treat COVID patients? No. There are specific clinics and specific, in fact, at this stage, there's one that is actually designated to by government that is saying is the place for quarantine if you get COVID-19 in Harare. So the other qualm is about how about the other cities around. Granted, it's hit Harare and Mash East most, and then also Vic Falls, but there needs to now be, which I know has happened, they've been centers now being set up across the country to cater to quarantine, to a quarantine situation. We do not have enough testing kits to test everybody. It's just that simple. This is a global problem for all of us, right, worldwide. So we're not unique to the rules around testing, that you will get tested when you exhibit severe symptoms. If you sort of go there and you're like, oh, I have a mild headache, or I was coughing last night, doesn't constitute as having severe symptoms. So we are the same. Worldwide. We don't yet have the capacity to test as many people as we want. There is a bit of criticism, though, about how low our testing rates are. That, okay, fine, yes, only test severe. But if somebody says, like vehemently, I was in contact with someone who tested positive, surely you should test them. You know what I mean? But we're not yet at that stage. So you look at our statistics now, and we're still in the hundreds of testing. We haven't even hit 1,000. And, when you look at that and you say, okay, you've got 11 confirmed cases. 11 out of how many? Do you get what I mean? So there is a little bit of that to say, all right, are we being realistic in terms of understanding the gravity of this pandemic? Those 11, whom were they in contact with? There's no way that they were alone. So the question is, it's probably, many of us are probably incubators of this or carriers and don't know it. But that's the reality, right? Because if you've got 11 cases, surely there's about 1,100 more. Do you know what I mean? So that's really the fear. But then that's where the resistance comes in, where you now start analyzing science and some of these former theories to say maybe climate does play a role in terms of temperature. Maybe our genetics do play a role. Who knows? Because the question then is, if those stats are representative of truth, then surely it hasn't hit us as hard. But it has only been about sort of 2.5 weeks since the first death. And with that in mind, you think of the incubation period being 14, some in cases 21 days. So it's like, okay, maybe we're actually still in that window where this could just suddenly exponentially multiply over the next couple of days. So we're not getting too comfortable just yet, hence the lockdown.
It's hard for some countries and even some states in America to understand that just one case is not just one case. It is lots of cases that haven't been figured out yet. And especially when there's a death, because that, just opens up the floodgates of realizing that that community is at risk. What do you think is the biggest backlash that's going to happen in Zimbabwe based on, COVID-19 and its spread?
Two things. Okay, financially, economically, I separate finance and economics, okay? Because economically, yes, a lot of industries have had to shut down naturally, okay? So there's lower production. And then financially, I talk about the people that live hand to mouth, the people whose finances, when we talk about their actual net worth that lives in their hand every day. And that if they don't go to these informal markets to sell their products or their produce, being farmers, or products being, informal traders, if they don't get to do that every day, they're going to suffer. And they're not going to be able to keep roofs over their heads. Our government hasn't been expressive yet about rent. I know some countries have stepped in on the rental issue to say no need to press people yet during the lockdown, especially around rent, because maybe they're, entrepreneurs or informal traders who will not have that money available, especially after a lockdown. So we are going to be significantly affected. And as a country that is already importing things like maize, to feed its population, it doesn't instill a lot of confidence in the people, because the question is, all right, if we were barely surviving then, what of now? Nice thing though is that fuel is available readily, which hasn't happened for a while. And there've been queues and queues and queues. So fuel is available. You just drive into a gas station and fill up your tank. But you know what? The bottom part of the pyramid, which is the majority of Zimbabweans, are not happy about this lockdown because it's not practical to them. They say the lockdown is a thing of privilege, isn't it? That you can afford to still be paid your corner office salary sitting on your balcony at home. Whereas some of us who have to live can't have that luxury. But you know what? Government had a tough decision to make. It was a tough call, Colin. If in Zambia, all our neighbors are affected by this virus, and we have a lot of, again, flights and movement from Zambia, a lot of flights and movement from South Africa, the government was between a rock and a hard place. Do they allow people to continue trading and operating as normal at the risk of dying? Whereas people will say, well, we'd rather die with food in our stomachs and have COVID than die from COVID and be starving. Do you know what I mean? So it really becomes, I think government made a very humanitarian and socialist decision, which you can't fault them for. For a change, we had the opportunity to be proactive, Colin, instead of reactive. When we have had outbreaks of cholera and typhoid in Zimbabwe, we've always had to react quickly because it's already hit and it's already killing people. Whereas this time, we actually had the chance to be like, all right, we've watched this spread across the world for at least 3 weeks to a month before it hit our borders. So I think the preparedness is there. And I would like to believe that a lot of measures, especially with all the generous donations from private sector, even from the WHO and from international donors, it really has made an impact in terms of saying that, no, we know it hasn't hit us in the thousands or the hundreds yet, but we are preparing. And I think that's what's giving people confidence.
Can you think of one downfall that you've noticed in Zimbabwe during this spread?
Two things. It's fake news, right? That'll continue to spread, which is a bit annoying. And when you're dealing with life and death, it's not right. The other thing would be a decision that was made the other day to reopen one of the biggest markets in Harare. It's called Mbare Musika. So what this is exactly what I spoke about, and I suppose that's where the pressure came from, is so many informal traders make a living from that place. And Mbare is like its own city, it's that big. Meanwhile, it's within the capital. So you have, thousands of people who live in that area and thousands of people who depend upon the business and trade that comes out of that place. But so the only criticism is that maybe it just still needs a bit of guidance in terms of order. And then the other request was maybe open other markets that are smaller around the city.
Instead of forcing everyone, kind of like cattle into one spot during this spread, if you choose specific places to have specific goods, then you limit the amount of exposure. What is one triumph that you've noticed? One happy thing that you're really proud of your people for doing?
For listening to authority. We've had a history of how we feel about authority in Zimbabwe. And we've had different authorities, right? So this time it was nice that the president could just stand in front of the nation and tell us all to just stay at home. And we did exactly that. I'm very proud of us for that. Proud that the opposition didn't try to make noise and challenge and critique his decision. I'm proud that, across all divides and differences, we really have stood together. That doesn't happen often in Zimbabwe, to be honest with you. And it just brings me so much joy that something like this can bring us together again.
Would you mind giving Zimbabwe and and then also the people of the world just like a little bit of inspiration or something you would like to tell them in Shona, and then tell us what you said in English if you don't mind.
Kune mhuri yeZimbabwe, kwese kwamuri, kunze kwenyika kana kuti muno munyika. Tinovimba kuti murambe makabatana. Ngatirambe takabatana nguva inoyi. Inguva yekuti tizivane, ticherechedzane. And nyaya yeCOVID-19 hachisi chinhu chidiki. Chinhu chatinofana kutoteereresa kuti tinochikwanisa sei kuti tirarame. Handiti zvinoda utsanana zvatiri kuita izvi. And we'll come out alive, we'll come out stronger. So ndinongovimba kuti kwamuri murambe muchingofonerana, because zvinokanganisa chero zvatinenge tichifunga, vanofungisisa, vanonzwa zvakawandisa. Saka ngatingorambe tichifonerana nevadikani vedu nehama dzedu, uchingocheka kuti uri sei, warara sei, wamuka sei, because kugarawo pamba futi zvinorwadza. Saka ngatichengetedzane. So I just said, to my family of Zimbabwe, outside the country, inside the country, wherever you are, let's just continue to be united during this. It's a fight that we fight together. I also hope that we respect the severity of this virus, and that we follow all the rules, and that we stay safe and clean. And that we also continue to check up on each other, because our mental health can deteriorate, our emotions can be in overdrive. So the idea is to just check on each other, call your loved ones, call your relatives, call your family. How are you doing? Good morning. Overdo it if you need to, but stay in touch. And we'll come out of it alive. We'll come out stronger.
Sadly, I mean, I could talk to you all day, but we're running out of time a little bit. So I just wanted to thank you so much, Ruvi, for taking the time to come on and show people what it's like in Zimbabwe, a snapshot of what is happening on the continent of Africa. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Colin, for having me. I'm glad we finally got to sit down. It is always good to share with the world what's going on. And it's not always the mainstream platforms we need to use. I think these actually go further these days. So thank you for taking the time to care about our little country all the way from LA. I do respect that, and I do honor that, because we are all in this together. Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. I now would like to call another friend of a friend. My friend Gabriel is a huge wealth of friends all around the world. And so I now want to call one of his friends named Chip Conley, who owns a hotel chain around all of the United States. So let's give him a call and see what he's going through.
My name is Chip Conley, and I am in Baja California Sur, which is the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula in Mexico. That's where I live most of the time. It's where our modern elder academy is. And my background is I've been a hospitality entrepreneur for 34 years, and was one of the first boutique hoteliers in the United States. Spent 7 years helping Airbnb grow into a big company, and then have had a curiosity about creating the world's first midlife wisdom school. And that's what I'm doing here in Baja.
How long has the Modern Elder Academy been around?
We opened it in January 2018 on a beta basis, trying it out. And then it opened to the public in November of 2018. And we've had 800 people go through the 1 week or 2 week program from 24 countries. It's a social enterprise, which means that we actually provide scholarships to more than 50% of the people who come. Average age is 52 to 53, but we've had people as young as 30 and as old as 88. So the idea is people want to come and figure out how to cultivate and harvest their own wisdom and shift their mindset on what it means to age.
How do you think we as a nation and as a globe should be dealing with the economic backlashes that are to come?
It's not just economic, it's emotional as well. And let's start with that. On the emotional side, I'm a big believer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so in some ways, our safety and physiological and safety needs are at risk here. And when people go to that state, that state of mind and state of being, they have a tendency to not want to go very far from home. And they have a tendency to like just want to hang out with their clan, with the people that they know well. So what that means for anybody in the travel industry, myself included, it's tough because the economics will follow the emotions. So I do think that there's some risk that the travel industry as a whole is going to go through not just a recession, but a depression. And there's no doubt it is in a depression right now in terms of just basically people are not traveling. But how long does that last? I don't, that's above my pay grade to know because it has a lot to do with public health knowledge that I don't have. I think that the other thing that is going to be problematic, though, is there's going to be a lot of finger pointing. Like, okay, so it's all China's fault, or it's all Italy's fault, or it's all the United States' fault, or whomever. And that finger pointing just balkanizes the world a little bit more, such that it's another reason not to travel, because why do I want to go to travel to that place where I don't like those people because they help spread that worldwide pandemic? So I think it's not so great. I think the flip side of this, from both a emotional and an economic perspective, is we have never had a pandemic during the kind of era we're in right now, where everything happens so quickly and it's all on social media and traditional media. So everybody's aware overnight and everybody's literate. I mean, 1918, half the population was not literate. Doesn't mean they didn't hear about it, but they couldn't read about it. They certainly didn't have Google. And so I think the awareness of the pandemic globally and the fact that there is the possibility of a reset, a global movement that just says, let's learn from this, could mean a resurgence or an emergence of new kinds of businesses and industries and ways people spend their money that are different than the past, or they're in evolution. Like people have definitely moved in the last 20 years to the experience economy, more focused on, more desirous of buying experiences than buying material products. Could that accelerate? Yes, I think that could accelerate.
Even in my industry, social impact entertainment is becoming, a hot topic term. And the branding around things also has so much, power behind it. So the fact that we are now post, Me Too, and people truly feeling like they have a stake in what they are experiencing on every platform that they experience it from, I think is shaping and almost kind of pre-shaped this ability for us to, have this type of connection and people wanting to watch it or people wanting to experience that thing. And I think that goes across the board for every brand, be it a product or a service. So there was already a big push for companies to create, brand reliance in the fact that you should want to, as a consumer, be a part of that person's brand. And I think that this is going to push that into even more of a need for small businesses, even up the chain to really large corporations. This reset that you speak about is going to take some time. It's not going to happen instantly.
I also think another thing that's going to come out of it is a growing sense of people wanting to invest in community. Again, I think that this is again an evolution. This has been in process. The more one of the things that I spent some time on is studying the festival world and created a website called Fest 300, dedicated to giving an annual award to the 300 best festivals in the world of all kinds, including religious pilgrimages as well. So it's not just music festivals; it's arts and cultural festivals, food festivals, film festivals, religious pilgrimages. My belief was that the more digital we get, the more ritual we need. And festivals are a form of ritual. I was on the board of Burning Man for a decade. And so I understand ritual in the form of festival pretty well. And I was able to go around the world studying it. And so I do think the idea of how do we create community in new ways? Some of that will be online, though. I mean, some of the creating community is going to be, how do we, if you look at the evolution of video conferencing or video calls, we're probably really in the early stages of what it ultimately will be. And how are the ways you customize it, especially if it takes a direction that has more of a virtual reality piece to it as well. So I think there's an element that I hate the idea as a travel industry person that we're all going to be staying in place, putting on our virtual reality glasses and looking at the Grand Canyon or whatever, and having conversations with people without having to travel. Because actually, I do believe that the IRL experience, the in real life experience, is different than the URL experience, because it allows our mirror neurons in our brains to dance together and to feel a palpable sense of collective effervescence. There are 10 principles that define Burning Man. And I had written a blog post back then in 2013 about what are some of the key lessons of Burning Man. And some of the lessons relate to what does it mean to be shelter in place as well. The first lesson is islands are more intense. So there's, whether it's cabin fever or island fever, people are feeling cabin fever right now. Island fever is what happens at Burning Man, because when you go there, it's not porous. You get inside and you're there then. Now it's big enough so you can have some space, but the truth is there's a bit of a sense of like the intensity of the crucible. And but I think that there's whether it's the idea of immediacy, being in the moment with people, or radical self-expression, or radical independence, being able to take care of yourself. The idea of the sense of community that's being built, and that we make our own rules. All of these things, I do think there's a lot to be learned. And I think Burning Man has learned from programs in the past. I went to a festival in 2013 that is the largest festival of humankind, 100 million people for 55 days, 100 million people over the course of 55 days. It's called Maha Kumbh Mela. So it's Kumbh Mela, it's Kumbh, second word Mela. It's the largest Hindu festival in the world at the Ganges River. Every 3 years, it's in a different location on the Ganges River in India. And then every 12 years, they have the Maha, which is the big one. The small ones are still like 10 or 15 million people, but the big one is, 100 million people over the course of 55 days. And Burning Man, and that's been going on for a long time. I can't remember how long, but like hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. Burning Man is just a pilgrimage. It's a religious pilgrimage. The religion is, not your traditional religion. It's not Hinduism. It's not Christianity. But it is a pilgrimage. And I think the idea of people being in community for pilgrimage and for ritual, I really do think that's coming back, because I think it's the antidote to people feeling sort of the sense of existential inertia, or our life was very much historically revolved around churches and rituals, or not just churches, any kind of religious institution and rituals. Religion and rituals. Well, that's not as big today, but there is still a thirst for community, for meaning, and I believe for some form of ritual as a way to help be a threshold for people from one place in their life to another.
Can you give any advice to small businesses across the globe, even up to large businesses who are dealing with this, on just what they should do through this time?
Here's a few thoughts. Number one is leaders are the emotional thermostats for those they lead. So what does that mean? It basically means you set the climate control. So if you're full of anxiety as the leader, guess what? People will be feeling that. Or if you're sort of out there in the blue, the blue yonder, being a Pollyanna and too much of an optimist and not a realist, then everybody will follow you there, or at some point lose trust in you. So I believe quite strongly that it's important to be exceptionally transparent in a crisis time, because anxiety is the combination of uncertainty and powerlessness. So the things that a leader really needs to do right now is help people feel that they have some certainty in a time of uncertainty and some sense of influence in a time of powerlessness. So that's the first step. And I wrote a lot about this in my book, Emotional Equations. Secondly, I think it's really important to know that a leadership team needs to feel that this is their opportunity to have their greatest learning in their lifetime, and to actually come together in a unified way. That starts with the transparency and the trust, but that actually then allows for some space for conflict. And some leaders who are conflict avoidant won't allow that space, but actually it's really a healthy thing in a time like this to have vigorous debate, as long as it's full of respect. But the debate allows for people to open up to possibilities that are not standard, things that we might not have done in normal times. So I think, while individual leaders are a thermostat, I think a group of leaders, basically have such a huge influence on the culture of an organization. But what tends to happen is often in a downturn, everybody's finger pointing. And everybody in the organization knows that the leadership team is not aligned. And that's when everybody starts to freak out. So having a really aligned leadership team that's open to, behind closed doors, having strong disagreements, but then aligning around whatever the decision is, that's pretty important. Cash flow, really essential right now. Assume the worst when it comes to your recovery, which is terrible. I mean, assuming the worst, frankly, means you're going to go out of business. So don't assume that necessarily. Although truly, if you should go out of business, figure it out, accept failure, accept that being a failure right now in this times, everybody will understand it. Nobody can look at you and say, you're a failure. So don't personalize, the economic consequences. It's interesting that the word depression speaks both to the economics and the emotions of someone. And so be careful to have your emotions too wrapped up in the economics. And then finally, I would just say, double down on your evangelists. If you have a collection of people who are your biggest supporters, in whatever form they are, whether they're community support or donors or investors or most importantly, customers, figure out how to ask for help from those people without sounding like you're too desperate, in such a way that people know that part of their role right now is to support you. How could they support you? Well, maybe you're closed. Let's say your business is closed and people love you. What you could use right now is gift certificate income. And of course, your customers might say, I've lost my job. So yes, it is a hard time to generate revenue, which is why cash flow is important.
I've been asking everybody what their current experience is, like their level of quarantine and things like that. You're in a part of the country not a lot of people have ever been to. And so what is your personal experience right now through this sheltering in place?
We're in a remote beach community that is a fishing and farming community. And so because it's remote, you can go for walks on the beach or in the desert nature and have no worry about social distancing. And so one of the beautiful things about being quarantined and sheltering in place here is you do have some space to sort of interact with nature. So that is part of our experience. We have a group of us who are quarantined together. There are 7 of us adults who are quarantined together, and then a couple of kids. So we're very careful about the rules and regulations. So our experience here has been very different than the United States. Now, Mexico is about a month and a half behind the US in terms of, the virus spreading. The good news down here is they've taken steps earlier in the process than the United States did. I think the thing that's most satisfying is the spaciousness. Our lives are really sped up. That's for sure. Mine is, at least. And I feel like life is in slow motion right now. And I'm appreciating that.
Thank you for taking the time to talk about all of the things you have and helping bring people, closer together around the world.
I appreciate what you're doing, Colin, and I just think the fact that you're doing this and expanding the collection of people who can listen to you and experience you and in different ways is beautiful.
As you could see in the last interview, I got it a little bit wrong in that, Chip used to own a hotel chain and used that to catapult himself into his new mission of spreading knowledge. So forgive me. I want to shout out to all associate producers and researchers who are out there, and it's their job to make sure that people who are creating content know exactly what they should at all points in time. And so with that, I would also like to finish this episode by just saying thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe right over. I think it's on this side. It's probably on the other side. I bet it's on this side. Boop, boop. So give us a subscribe so you can get all future episodes as soon as they come out. Also, every subscribe does help my company. And like Chip said, we should all ask for help when we need it. And that's what I'm currently doing. So definitely hit subscribe, and we'll see you next time.